of my father practicing the Dietersdorf concerto. And I just loved those harmonic passages. That was my favorite thing. So, I started I was 10 years old when I started on the quarter-size bass. And I literally had a lesson every day. So I couldn't get into bad habits.
Oh, wow.
It was very intense. He was very demanding as a teacher. He had always very high standard. But what I really learned a lot from him is, always think of the music first. And that was always, doesn't matter if I play the scale or I play the etude or anything, it had to be beautiful. It had to sound right, musically speaking. It had to have a beautiful sound. Nothing had to be, you couldn't have any scratchy things, sound or anything. Everything was always with great detail.
We are chatting today with Pascale Delache-Feldman. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations. And Pascale has been somebody that's been recommended so many times for the podcast. I know I say that a lot, but it's true. She's just such a wonderful person. She's doing so many great things in the bass world, and she's had a fascinating career. You're really going to love this conversation. Pascale teaches at the New England Conservatory. She teaches at Bard College. She teaches at Tufts. She teaches at Brown. She plays all over the place. She's the founder of the Boston Bass Bash. We have, like I find with so many guests, we have many, many threads connecting our lives together, including the Schleswig-Holstein Music Festival. You're going to love that part of the conversation. And I really hope you enjoy this. This podcast is brought to you by Upton Bass String and Instrument Company and D'Addario Strings. More on them later, but let's dig into this conversation with Pascale Delache-Feldman. And you were out here in San Francisco for the convention, weren't you? Were you one of the presenters?
I was, yes. I think that's we met, right?
Yeah, I sadly, I didn't make it out there for that one, but I know we've met. I think where we met, because you were at Penn State also, weren't you?
Oh, that's where I met you.
I think that's where we met. I couldn't make it out to San Francisco, but
okay.
But that's. Did you bring your bass out for that San Francisco convention?
I did. That was crazy. That was really crazy because the plane situation with the case. I have a David Gage case, and I got to the airport and I thought, I should be fine. The limit is 100 pound, I think, and their scale wasn't working. So I was like, well, great, I'll just estimate, tell them 75 and it'll be fine. And they were like, no, we need to find a scale. So they bring another scale, and that one didn't work. And then they brought another one and finally it worked and said, oh, you're 3 pounds overweight.
No.
We can't take the bass.
Really?
And I was like, yeah. And so they asked me if there was anything inside that I could get out of the case. And I said, well, yeah, I have my soft case in it, but I don't want to do that. And I said, well, you're going to have to, if you want your bass to go with you. So that's what I did. And they put plastic wrap all around the bass.
Really? Oh.
Yeah, and charged me $300 on the process.
Oh. It's stuff that like that makes me never want to fly with a bass. Do you have to?
I think then, yeah. Since then, I've refused to travel with it.
Yeah. It's amazing talking to people that do that all the time. Like Tony Monzo is a bass player who plays a lot of chamber music, and he's constantly flying with his really nice bass. And I guess he says Virgin America is a little bit better than some of the other airlines, but but that's just nothing but stress. I'm just like in a constant state of. Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, it's more stressful than playing the concert itself.
It is, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but I understand, you want to play on your own instrument. It makes a big difference, I always find. I've played on other people's instruments. It's just not the same, you know. So I understand that he wants to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I find myself just thinking so much about just adjusting to the instrument and getting used to it, and it's hard to really tap in. It's hard to really feel at home on someone else's bass. For me, at least.
That's right. Yeah, for me too. I just so you know, I try to drive as much as I can. So I can, you know, I will drive up to 10 hours if I have to. That sounds about like a nice full day. Yeah. Well, and there are a lot of places you can get from Boston in a full day. You can hit. Yeah. So that's usually what I try to do. Much rather play with my instrument.
And for San Francisco and for Penn State, I think you and your husband were playing, right? The cello bass duo.
Yeah, I think for the Penn State, we played the duo. For San Francisco, I believe I played the all solo bass.
It was solo bass
program.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I love that you have this duo. You know, I mean, I'm trying to think how often I've played with a cellist. I guess I've done Rossini a few times. One of my best friends growing up was a cellist, and we played a couple of joint recitals together. But how cool that you two get to do that and get to be a duo. And you've commissioned works for duo as well, haven't you?
Yes, quite a bit. We still do that. We've commissioned a piece by John Arbison, which was a project with dance, actually, for the Celebrity series here in Boston. And that was really exciting. I just love the process of it. He actually wrote it at the same time as he was writing the bass concerto.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and actually originally he thought he was going to use some of the same material for the duo, but it decided to go in a totally different direction. So, and it came out really beautifully. It's a really beautiful piece, challenging but beautiful, and worked really well with the dance. And it's called Deep Dances, actually.
Deep Dances.
And
wow.
Yeah. So that was a while back, and then we've had new pieces written. We're actually expanding a little bit with our duo, adding piano if we feel like the music we want to play is what we're looking for. Right now we're doing a lot of tango music. We're working with music of Gardel, Carlos Gardel, and Piazzolla. And so if we decided to add piano to give us more opportunity to perform, you know, with more instrumentation. And we recently had two premiere by composers. John McDonald, it's a local composer here who teach at Tufts University. Then he wrote really beautiful pieces for us, and also another composer, Thomas Stumpf, also teaching at Tufts University for actually cello bass and four-hand piano.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so it's been really a great journey. Actually, I just love the intimacy of chamber music, and it's been really a process, you know, collaborative process, and it's been growing quite a bit since the very beginning. Actually, when we first started, there was really not much music, as you can imagine, other than the Rossini, like you said.
Right.
So we had to create a lot of music for ourselves. And the way we choose is that we wanted to find music that we loved. That was our main goal. It doesn't matter what instrumentation originally was written for. It's what we wanted to do. So one of the first pieces actually we transcribed was the violin and viola duo Mozart Köchel 423. And everybody told us we were crazy, but we thought, why not, you know?
Yeah.
It was challenging for sure, but it's one of our staple pieces now, and we just love playing it. We've arranged pieces, the Romanian folk dances by Bartók. That was quite a challenge to make it full and just getting all the harmonies. but it worked really well. And then we wanted to also commission music as well. And one of the first pieces that we commissioned actually was from my husband, Emmanuel, who wrote a piece called Enigma No. 1 for cello and bass. And it's been a lot of success. This piece has been really growing on us. Okay. And we've transcribed music by Gershwin, all kind of things. We've had a Viennese composer also wrote for us, and it's called Axiom. And the reason is because our name originally was Axiom Duo, and then he was from Vienna, so he made kind of a compound word, Axiom, which was quite interesting as well. Our name we chose originally, Axiom Duo, was really described very much what we were looking to do, which was, like as axiom means, is undeniable truth, meaning, we wanted to keep the same key that the composer intended to write the piece in, and try to keep it as original as possible. And so that was challenging. When we could, I tried to keep the same octave, but not always. Because I still wanted to sound like us, like a cello and a bass. I didn't want to sound like, scratchy. Right. Bass up there. Yeah. But still wanted to really be as close as possible to the music. That's always been our goal. The one thing with our name is that people couldn't pronounce it or understand what it meant. So we were recommended to eventually change it, and we changed it to Duo Cello e Basso, which I find it a bit boring, but but it's very descriptive.
It tells people exactly what they're going to hear, so that makes sense. Yeah,
it's the cello and the bass. Can you tell? So yeah. Wow. Yeah, so I mean, it's just, and it's been really, it was quite, challenging and rewarding at the same time, being married to your chamber music partner. But we've really grown so much, musically and personally, of course, as well. It really requires a tremendous amount of listening skills. And, sometimes you lead, sometimes you have to follow. Yeah. You have to be able to really enhance the other person's line. So I just love that collaboration. It's just wonderful. And we were quite stubborn at the beginning. So it was, like I said, a challenge, but we find our way around, and, it's just great teamwork. So, yeah.
Oh, my wife is a harpist, and she and I play in a duo together, and so I definitely identify with what you're talking about. It's very interesting to be playing with your spouse, and we didn't play together for a long time, and then we did, and it was always a lot of fun, and that presents some unique challenges, but it's a really cool way to have another aspect of that relationship.
Yeah, definitely. It's just, it was hard, right, after, rehearsal. Okay, now we're back to husband and wife. That was hard because we kept going. But it's been a really exciting journey.
Well, I just love cello bass. It's such a cool kind, and how great that you're striving to keep everything in the same key and octave if possible. That makes some pieces really challenging, I'm sure. Some sort of Yeah,
definitely challenging, but we developed a certain sound and unique sound that is make us who we are. And originally people would laugh at us when we told them. That was like in the early 90s where, chamber music was really set, in the old world with, it had to be a string quartet or a piano trio. And here we are with cello and bass, and people were laughing quite a bit. We even had composers saying, "Oh, no, that's not cello and bass. What do you want to do with that? You need to add a piano or something." And we're like, no, really, you have to trust us. So it was definitely interesting that way. I think we tried to, to make it so that it was accessible to everybody.
Yeah.
And our concerts, people I just love the reaction to the people would always say, oh, we didn't know what to expect with the cello and bass. But man, the power you got with those two instruments was amazing. So, just, build on that.
Yeah, it's an amazing sound world that you can get with the cello and bass. There's a composer out here in San Francisco named Shinji Ashima. He plays in the San Francisco Opera and Ballet, and he is written for cello bass. One of the San Francisco symphony bassists, Charles Chandler, he plays in a duet with, I believe, Amos Young is the cellist's name. And so Shinji's written a piece called Bariolage for them, and then they've played a lot. And it's been really fun. They just played this past summer here in San Francisco at the base camp, and I love that combination. So how cool that you've gotten a chance to spend so much time doing that. Yeah, and it's probably quite challenging. I've played violin and bass duets, but cello and bass is for intonation is extremely challenging. Yeah. But it's really rewarding when it sounds like when you have that perfect intonation together. It just rings. It's amazing the power that it comes out of those instruments. Yeah, and intonation is challenging, isn't it? Trying to get that. Oh gosh. Yeah, because in some ways they're so close to each other, in tessiture. So yeah. Right. There's something about that timbre. Yeah, there's something about the fact that they are so similar that almost adds a level of similar but different enough, and the tuning being tuned in fifths versus fourths, and it's like it's a challenging resonance to. It really is. Yeah. Yeah. But when you get it, it's so exhilarating. I mean, it's really exciting. Yeah. It's that's just the way the power that you get out of those two instruments is pretty unbelievable. And what fun to start exploring tango too. That must be and adding piano to the mix. What that must be because what a fun way to play the bass. What just distinctively cool, and the percussive effect. Are you starting to break a lot of bow hairs playing tango? Yeah. Okay. Exactly. What started it? Well, I mean, I'm French, and we love that kind of music. Yeah. I always loved world music, and tango is very, very, very popular in France. So I always wanted to do it, and I finally said, okay, let's find some repertoire and just do it. So we started with some the Four Seasons of Buenos Aires for the violin, cello, and piano version of it. So we transcribed that. And so, we have the very rhythmical, hammering kind of bowing stroke, and also the very lyrical stroke. So I just love those pieces. They're just very exciting to play. We also added some songs from Carlos Gardel, which is the father of the tango, the traditional tango, and so you get some very beautiful songs as well through that, doing that. So very cool. It's our newest project. Yeah. One thing that has impressed me about Upton Bass ever since I got to know them was how many artists there are out there that are so satisfied with the work that Upton has done for them. Here's Mark Ramirez on his experiences having Upton copy his beautiful Cavani bass.
I do a lot of moving around and giving master classes and stuff like this. I had a copy made of it by the Uptons, by Gary and Eric Roy at the Upton shop. They made a copy of it, but they made an even smaller copy. I think it's a 7/8 copy of the bass. I use it now. I use that bass for my solo playing, which I do a lot. Recently, I've been doing a lot, especially here. And it has a detachable neck. The detachable neck, man, I tell you, in Europe, it's the craze.
Learn more at uptonbass.com, and thanks for sponsoring the podcast, guys. Well, what a fun project. It's just such a great musical style to explore, and as a bass player, it's Andres Martin, this Argentinian bassist and composer out here. I've had the chance to spend some time with him at some different events, and he brought a tango group in this fall from Argentina. They were doing a tour, and then they were working with the students down at the camp in Mexico I was at, and it's just so cool it's such a subtle and sophisticated and just sort of viscerally satisfying style to play. I just love it.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah, it's and it's so different from the other Latin American music. It's so emotional. I mean, not that the other their music are not, but there's so much sorrow in the music that you don't see in other Latin American music, and they really reflect the people as well. You know, so it's interesting.
Your dad was a bassist, right?
Yes.
Wow.
I started bass with my dad. I grew up, surrounded with basses. So, when my parents wanted my sister and I, to play a musical instrument, and they asked us, okay, what do you want to play? And I just looked around the room, and they were full of basses. What else can I say?
Right.
So I said bass. It could have been anything that day, really. My sister chose the flute just to be the opposite of everybody else. But, they were there. So, my earliest musical memory is of my father practicing the Dietersdorf concerto. And I just loved those harmonic passages. That was my favorite thing. So, I started I was 10 years old when I started on the quarter-size bass. And I literally had a lesson every day. So I couldn't get into bad habits.
Oh, wow.
It was very intense. He was very demanding as a teacher. He had always very high standard. But what I really learned a lot from him is, always think of the music first. And that was always, doesn't matter if I play the scale or I play the etude or anything, it had to be beautiful. It had to sound right, musically speaking. It had to have a beautiful sound. Nothing had to be, you couldn't have any scratchy things, sound or anything. Everything was always with great detail. So, it was like, being an athlete who has a coach every day, that was pretty amazing to have that kind of training. And then, so I worked with my father for 7 years until I got to the Paris Conservatory. And that was very different because suddenly I had one lesson a week,
Right.
And that was hard because I didn't know really how to practice on my own. So it was a challenge at first. And as well, I was also, on my last year of high school. So it was really, really tough that first year. But there was, and it's wonderful to see my dad. He's still, he's 75 now, and he still plays the bass really, really beautifully, which is, it's rare to see somebody at that age still play so beautifully. It's very inspiring. He always, although he played in the orchestra at Toulouse, the National Toulouse Orchestra, as well as teaching at the conservatory there, he always had annual recitals. So he was always practicing, always, so it was a good role model that way. He decided, it's not because I'm in the orchestra I have to stop. He just kept going and playing a lot of recitals and chamber music. I grew up with that.
I'd love to know, what a rich musical background and what a great role model. What else were you into as a kid besides bass? Because what a natural, what a natural path with your father doing that. Do you have any other hobbies or sports or interests or?
I had absolutely no interest in anything else.
Did you really? You were just going for that music. Okay. Wow.
I was though I didn't think I was going to be, I never thought of myself, I'm going to be a musician just like my dad. I was kind of happy to be. I was just a happy kid who just, floated into, just like going with the flow, and I love hiking. That was always something I still do to this day, actually. Love nature, hiking. That was my big thing, and biking as well. So, but other than that, he made me practice. I say he made me because I really would never practice that much, but I had to practice long hours. So my weekends were spent in practicing the bass. That was it.
Wow.
A lot.
And then headed to the Paris Conservatory and working there, and then after that, Curtis and working with Roger Scott. So like I'd love to hear. I'm sure folks would love to hear. Like, what were some similarities and differences between your experience at the Paris Conservatory and then going to Curtis? And I know it was different periods of your life, so probably things felt different anyway. But what were those? How were those similar and maybe different?
Yeah, so, actually it was pretty much the same part of my life because I spent 2 years at the Paris Conservatory before going to Curtis.
Okay.
So I was pretty much in the same time period. I would say, oh God, the differences are huge. It was it was a shock actually because when I came to Curtis, the sound, the different sounds, the aesthetic of sound was so different from what I grew up with, where in France it was very lyrical, very, always thinking of beauty of sound and focusing in great detail in the music. When I went to Curtis, it was so different because you had to learn things very quickly, and I wasn't used to that. Also, I didn't do much orchestra playing while I was at the Paris Conservatory because I was in high school as well, so it was hard to do all of it. So that was one thing that I really barely did, although I did play in a youth orchestra before that. That was an eye-opener for me. I remember my first bass orchestra class. I didn't speak much English at all at the time, and Roger Scott had told me, okay, we're going to play the Roman Carnival by Berio. And at Berio, I'm like, I don't think Berio wrote a piece by that. Because he was trying to pronounce it the French way for me, okay. And he was very proud of his French. and I was like, oh, I don't know, it doesn't matter, it's okay, I'm not gonna worry about it. Right. And so I get to my first class, and the Curtis, the old building, the room was very narrow and very long, and there was 8 of us, and we were all sweating, like we were being so scared of those classes. But I had no idea, so I came in, and everybody's practicing this piece, and I'm like, oh, I didn't practice this. And he made us play one at a time, and he looked to me, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I didn't practice this piece. And he was like, I told you it was going to be Berio. And I'm like, but that's Berlioz. I said, well, don't you know? It's like, no, it's Berlioz with a Z. So he said to me, okay, that's one time, but don't do it again. So I never did that again. That was very scary. But it was wonderful to learn to play this music because I really had never experienced it on that level, Yeah. So that was, for me, a huge difference. Again, the sound for me, I felt I didn't really like the sound of when I first arrived. For me, it was just so rough. Yeah. Compared to what I was used to. It was very orchestral. I really wasn't used to that. So it was a huge adjustment for me. Definitely a big adjustment.
Interesting. I love hearing about that sound concept. So a little more like lyrical and beauty of sound. And Terry Barbet and we chatted about this a while. Mm-hmm. Like I was just asking him, like, define, if someone says French sound, what does that mean to you? And I think those were terms that he mentioned as well. Versus that, orchestral or rougher or kind of American style. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. And here in the U.S. you have both French and German. versus in France, really, most people play only French. So that's also that, different quality of sound. So, yeah, but definitely it was a shock. And like I said, I didn't speak English at all. So it was really a lot of challenges, culturally as well. Yeah.
I'm sure going from Paris to Philadelphia was a major shockaroo, just the city itself.
Yeah. Yes, it was. I wasn't used to, when I before I came to the U.S., I never planned to come to the U.S. I was not in my plan at all. Because, for French people, the U.S. was basically New York City, big
right.
buildings and eating burgers. So I was like, oh, God, no way. And then it was just really by chance. The Curtis Orchestra was touring in France, and they did this TV show. It was a classical TV show called Le Grand Échiquier. Which they were really amazing shows, actually. And they were presenting the school. At the time, it was John Delancey who was the director of the school. Mm-hmm. And so I'm watching this one night with my parents, and I was not yet at the Paris Conservatory at the time. I was about to get in. But my father said, "Are you interested?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's kind of cool." But I didn't think much of it. And he told me, "Well, you're not ready now, but when you are, I'll let you know." And sure enough, 2 years later, he said, "You should try it." So I didn't take it that seriously at the time. My mom called because she was the only one who could speak a little bit of English, and it was after the deadline. The audition had passed already, I believe. Some of the audition had passed. But Roger Scott was interested because I was coming from the Paris Conservatory. So he said, "Okay, go ahead and have her send a tape." And so my mom told me, "Okay, you got to do a tape." And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And I was having a good time in Paris, And after a week, she's like, "Did you send your tape?" And I'm like, "Oh, not really." And she got so mad at me. You have no idea. She started screaming, "Yeah, I called all the way to the U.S. and we tried to convince them to listen to you. And what are you doing?" So literally the next day, I recorded myself. I recorded the arpeggione and some other pieces, and literally sent it all in one day. And that's how I got in. Yeah.
Well, it obviously it was a good tape. So even though it was one day, it sounds like that really worked out quite well.
Yes. And then I couldn't believe when I got in. I was like, "Oh my God, I'm going to learn to speak English now." So you should never say never, because you just don't know where things brings you to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I saw somewhere that you did the Schleswig-Holstein Music Festival. Did you do that? As we're talking, I am looking at my poster from Schleswig-Holstein when I did it back in the late 90s, and I just had a blast. What?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. What was that festival like for you? That must have been yet another cultural experience being up there in Germany.
Yeah, well, for me, I just loved it. I believe this one I did was the very first one with Bernstein.
Oh, wow.
So that was their very first year, I think it was in 87, I believe. Mm-hmm. Working with Bernstein was amazing. It was just, we were working on the Sacre du Printemps by Stravinsky. And it was just so amazing how, visceral, and he was just really making us understand the depth of the piece. And he's just so passionate and incredible genius, actually. But I remember the very first rehearsal, he made us do a scale. That's all we did. He conducted a scale, a C major scale, and, would slow down and speed up and try to see how we would follow him. And afterward, he said, "Okay, good, I can work with you."
Wow.
Well, she was like, "Whoa." That was just amazing, really amazing. And he was so easy to approach. So approachable. You could talk about so many different subjects with him. He could talk to you about literature, and you'd be feeling so small. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. and you always say, as a young musician, you need to know all of this, Shakespeare and all of this. You can't play music without knowing all of this stuff, So it's true, we were very passionate, and it was just wonderful. And the environment, in that castle it was just really wonderful to be there and having all this great food and.
Yeah. It's quite rural. I remember walking outside and there are all these Holstein cows and you're walking by and the cows are looking at you and
yeah, but I grew up in this kind of environment, so for me it was fine. It was totally normal. Although a lot of Americans complain about the smell, but but for me it was like, yeah, whatever. They're cows. That's what they do.
Wow. This episode is brought to you by D'Addario Strings. Check out their Kaplan strings, which have versatility and control throughout the entire dynamic spectrum. Rich tonal color palette, superb bow response, and beautiful balance. I've been using them myself on my bass for the last year or so and totally love them. They sound great pizzicato. They sound great arco. Folks like David Allen Moore of the Los Angeles Philharmonic use them. Brandino of Black Eyed Peas, he uses them. What fantastic strings. Thank you for sponsoring the podcast, D'Addario. Oh, how great that you did that with Bernstein. I have seen clips of those Stravinsky, the Rite of Spring rehearsals, because that was documented very extensively, and it's so cool. I'll look on YouTube if I can find him. I'll link to him so people can check it out. But yeah, he's talking about just smelling the earth and like this sort of like that was how cool to be there for that.
Oh, it was amazing. And it was like perfect environment, He was like, just smell that earthy, we're in the barn. So it was easy to feel that. It was really wonderful. I am in that documentary actually. So with my husband, we were boyfriend and girlfriend at the time, but yeah. Yeah.
Whoa, you both did Schleswig-Holstein together. Okay, I that's great. I need to go back and check out that documentary. It's been a few years, but wow.
Yeah. It was very cool. Very, very cool.
And so like Toulouse or you're growing up in that area, that it was rural like that pastoral and cows.
Well, no. Actually, Toulouse is a quite big city, but before we moved to Toulouse, we were in the east side of France, in the Alps region. Oh, so, yeah, so that was where I really grew up with a lot of animals around me. My mom decided to, grow all our vegetables, and we had goats, and my mom made cheese, and, so it was just like that kind of environment I grew up with. And when we moved to Toulouse, it was so urban for me. I just couldn't understand, why would you move to a big city like that? Yeah. But for my father, it was definitely better for work, There was a bigger orchestra, and
Sure. Wow. Yeah. But then since then, it sounds like it's been pretty big cities. Oh
yeah.
Toulouse to Paris. Yeah. Boston is a big city too.
Yeah. I guess you go where the work is, I guess.
And speaking of work, you do a ton of performing, then also teaching. I mean, you're at Bard, you work with NEC, you work at Tufts, you work at Brown. Am I missing any schools? I think that's quite an active schedule.
Yes, and privately as well. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, so I do a lot of teaching, and actually, it was not planned at all. It was not something I thought I would ever do, honestly. And it was really by pure accident. Somebody called me because they heard of me. She was actually leaving town, and she wanted to make sure that our studio was followed through with somebody who she felt like could help the art students. And so she called me. I said, "Do you want my bass studio? I'm leaving town." And I said, "Okay, sure," not knowing what I was getting into, actually. Right. And that was really an incredible eye-opener, because the system in France is so different from here. in France, you have to do solfège for a year before you can touch any instrument. So you have to read music. And so I did not know that when I first taught. And I assumed my student knew that. So, after a couple months, I just realized some of my students didn't read music at all. They were just playing imitating me, basically. Mm-hmm. So that was really a surprise. The other thing, is that I taught the way I was taught. So, kind of very, to the highest standard, but also, not really being very encouraging.
Okay.
And sure. I had wonderful students who were, I had this one student who said, Pascale, you only tell me when it's bad. You don't tell me when it's good. And it was like somebody slapped me on the face. I was like, oh my God, I can't do that. That's no good. So, I realized that you have to have a balance, Mm-hmm. You have to be honest with your student, but at the same time, you have to be, do it in a positive way so they can learn and feel comfortable in a good environment.
Yeah.
So I've evolved a lot, over the years, of course,
I find that psychology of teaching so fascinating because I know that when I started teaching, I think maybe a lot of young people are this way. I'm definitely much more encouraging and just probably positive in general than I was when I started out. And it's such a fascinating thing to me, just the whole psychology of working with someone over a period of time and helping them move forward on the instrument or as a musician or in their career. I just love it. Did you love teaching from the beginning, or was it something you came to enjoy? How did that work for you?
It's definitely something I came to enjoy.
Okay.
It was really hard for me because maybe partially because of my English at the time. It was hard to verbalize some of those ideas. And in fact, I never thought about some of those ideas, Mm-hmm. A student would ask me, well, how do you start that, that bow, how do you, and I would be like, well, you just pull the bow. And I'm like, wow, that's a stupid answer. I got to think more about this. So it was actually really beneficial to my own playing as well, because I had to really verbalize it and explain it. And sometimes, you have students who you have to explain in a different way than others. Right. So you have to find, think of every angle because everybody learns in such a different way. So that was definitely, over the years. And I find that, when I was first teaching, I was thinking of the high level that I was taught. But, so I would push my students in a way that wasn't, some students, they just want to have fun and enjoy the music, and they're not all going to be professionals. Mm-hmm. And that's okay with that, So I realized I needed to relax and, making sure that they got something positive out of the experience.
Yeah. So obviously you've taught a ton in all sorts of different levels.
Mm-hmm.
Just thinking broadly, are there any, if we take like early college students, like freshmen, sophomore, mm-hmm. undergrad students, mm-hmm. are there any go-to methods or exercises? People love hearing about these sort of things that you tend to
mm-hmm.
reach for, especially in those early years, just for building technique, mm-hmm. building facility. What are some of your favorite materials that you tend to use?
What I like to do with my undergrad student is first, on their first lesson, is to establish what they really need. Of course, I heard them in February for their audition, and I don't see them until September. So there might be little changes, but in general, I have a pretty good idea of what is needed. So we make a plan, we make goals, and we review them every semester to make sure we stay on track. Ultimately, for me, by the end of the 4 years of undergrad, I want my student to have a solid foundation, good understanding of different bow strokes, solid left hand, definitely a better body awareness, know how to use their bodies to prevent injuries, and start to develop their own voice, which takes time and is constantly evolving. I like to demonstrate quite a bit in my teaching. I think that students learn by imitation. So, like we all, I think, learn to emulate our teachers and the masters as well. But ultimately, I do want my students to find their own sound, their own voice. And that, that's something that obviously takes quite a bit of time. So now, each student is different. So I use different material depending on the student's need. So, for example, if a student needs to work on string crossing, for example, I use the Fred Zimmerman books, The Concept of Bow Technique, or the Al Robinson's book, Stroking, Part 3. I really like that book as well. I also like to use orchestra excerpts because they are short and we can focus on a particular bow stroke. I like especially Mozart and Beethoven excerpts. They're really great for this purpose. If a student, for example, need work on their left hand in thumb position, for example, I use the Franco Petracchi book, Simplified High Techniques, or the Marco Machado Tao of Bass book, which I actually really like as well. That's a new book, actually, that came out not that long ago, but there's a ton of wonderful exercise for the left hand. I would also work on, of course, a lot of scales, arpeggios, all intervals, as well as double stops. The Nani Caprice etudes have great etudes in double stops as well, which I've used in the past. So that they are very nice and musical. I like to use also the Storhaby 57 etudes. I use as well the Kreutzer and Fiorello etudes and a little bit of Billet as well. For the more adventurous student who is interested in exploring new music, I use the Alain Weber 10 rhythmic and melodic etudes. Alain Weber was famous for his solfège book, and I believe those books are used also as well here in the U.S. Those etudes are, of course, étonnants. They have a lot of meter changes and more complex rhythm with quintuplets and tricky syncopations with different rhythms as well. So it's a really, really good book if you are interested in challenging yourself. For repertoire, again, it depends on the student's ability. I always actually use the Bach cello suites as they are great at developing better understanding of the musical line, as well as, of course, intonation, use of bow, and articulation. That's a must. Bach is an incredible way to learn so much about how to use your bow and understanding phrasing. Of course, I expect my student to learn all the major bass concertos like Dittersdorf, Van Hal, Kusewiski, and Bottesini. In addition to sonatas such as Vivaldi sonatas or the Bach Viola da Gamba sonatas, Mitschek's, Schubert Arpeggioni, Hindemith Sonata, as well as short pieces, of course, by Bottesini, Glier, Kusewiski, etc. So, yeah, a lot of material. I think the key in my teaching is to find balance and be efficient because my students really have only 1 hour of private lesson per week with me, although I'm always, available to help them if needs be, but it's, teaching them how to really teach themselves, to ask a lot of questions, to be inquisitive, so that they can really accomplish a lot every week. So that's basically what I do with my undergrad students, as well as all my students as well. Also, Jason, I wanted to add a couple of advice for young musician you asked that was your last question. So if you don't mind, I would like to add a couple more things. So if I would like to add a couple things, a couple advice. So I would say also as well, go to bass workshops in your local area, and also, of course, the ISB convention. It's fun, it's inspiring, it's very motivating and educational. You make a lot of great bass friends, and it is a great place to network as well. So for a young musician starting, I think it's a wonderful place to really connect. The other thing also I wanted to add is that the musical environment has changed quite a bit over the years, and keeps changing as well. There's to be realistic, there's just not enough orchestra opening available for all the students that are graduating every year. So I tell all my students, I recommend that they are they open their musical horizon to maybe, teaching chamber music, new music, early music, jazz, world music, whatever, that speaks to them, or something they might not think they like, but they would like. For me, when I started teaching, I didn't expect I would like it. It was absolutely not in my plan. So I think you need just to be really open-minded and try new things. I think the more diverse students are, or young musicians are, the more successful they will be in their career. So to me, that's really important to just be open-minded that way. And of course, if you still want to do the orchestra auditions, go for it. But I still think you should be flexible and try new things. It will, either way, it's good for you. It will enrich your musical life either way. So I just highly recommend to be trying many different aspects of making music.
I love that you started the Boston Bass Bash. Was that 2001?
Yeah.
Right? I just got back from the Chicago Bass Festival. I'm actually wearing my Chicago Bass Festival T-shirt right now, and I just love those kinds of events. Bringing bass players together. It's a heck of a lot of work, but it's such a great thing for a community. What inspired you to get the Boston Bass? And by the way, that's a great name, Boston Bass Bash. I love that. What inspired you to start that event?
Actually, I felt like the Boston bass community was quite isolated. There's really not much other than, of course, the Boston Symphony players. There was not much outside people coming in. And going to those ISB convention, it was amazing experience for me. I've met so many people, learned so much new ideas, and so I wanted to bring that to the bass community here in Boston. So that's really how it really, started. I went and studied at the Longy School of Music, where I teach, of Bard College, and started with very small in 2001, and then I had to take a couple years off because my son was born, and studied again a couple years later at NEC, actually the Boston New England Conservatory, and those were much bigger events. It really started to build, and I had people from, of course, people locally, but also, Tim Cobb and Rufus Reed. I had both jazz and classical. And we had a lot of, of course, the usual masterclass, lectures, bass ensembles, recitals, all of that good stuff. It was just wonderful to see, the students who really strive for this kind of stimulation. Like for me, when I was, going to the ISB convention, it was just the same thing. So I felt like it was a need here, definitely in the East Coast.
It's great. It's great that you started that. That's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was so much work I didn't realize, because the one thing, that I learned over the years is at the time I really didn't know how to delegate very well. So I was doing everything. Being a perfectionist, I would just I had to do everything. And really, after a while, I burned out. I needed to take a break from it. So I'm thinking of going back to it for sure.
Yeah.
Just finding a venue and definitely getting more supports. That's really what I feel like is important when you do that kind of event.
Yeah, it's so hard to delegating is such a hard thing, but that something like that is, it's such a massive undertaking. And just like
really
watching,
is.
I don't, the only thing I really organize on that front is the Chicago Bass Festival. But I have help. It's run through a youth orchestra organization, so a lot of the, all the mailings and all the emails and the poster design and all that stuff. I'm not luckily doing that, but even what I'm doing, it's a ton of time, but it's so great. I love events like that because there's so many people, whether it's Chicago or Boston or here in San Francisco or whatever, there's a lot of the time it's just not feasible for someone to go to the ISB convention or the European, because the cost, like you were describing with getting your bass to San Francisco, it's just cost prohibitive, the time. So I just love the way, and those events can pull the local community together in a really cool way. So it's great. It's great that you've done that.
Yeah, I just think it's important for those young, bass players to see what's out there. It's so important to hear different sounds, and different way of seeing music and listening to music. So that's the best place where you can do that.
So I got to ask you, because I think this is a topic that's come up several times, and I know you have background in this, but Alexander technique, Feldenkrais, Tai Chi, injury,
and Tai Chi.
Yeah. When did you start exploring that? And I'd love to know just how that's affected your teaching. It's such a, just like keeping ourselves healthy and approaching the instrument right. It's so important. When did you start exploring those different methods?
So actually, because of my teaching, I got to a point in my teaching where I felt very frustrated because I could see students would be struggling physically with their instruments, and I could see, but I didn't know how to really help them. Yeah. So, where I teach at the Longy School of Music of Bard College, there's a body and mind program. So teachers can take those classes for free, and I'm like, whoa, I got to take advantage of that. So I started with I think I did the Alexander technique first, and then the Feldenkrais second semester, and I just fell in love with Feldenkrais especially method. What I liked about it is that compared to the Alexander technique, and it's really a personal thing, but it was, you are on the floor, so you have a constant feedback of what's happening with your back and your arm and your shoulders. And so that for me really spoke to me more so than the Alexander technique. So, but some people, I felt like Alexander technique was a bit more abstract for me because again, you are in space, but you don't have a feedback, unless other people tells you about it. Right. But like on Feldenkrais, you have the floor, so you constantly have that feedback. So it really spoke to me. And then later on, I did Tai Chi by curiosity. There was a class that was offered, and I thought, what the heck, I'll try that. Turns out that I actually find it to be extremely related to bass playing as well. In Tai Chi, basically, you go from one movement to the next in a way that does not break the flow. And so, like for bow change, smooth bow change, it's the same kind of technique where you have to move in one direction and go to the next direction without having that break of flow. And so it really taught me a lot about that in Tai Chi and how to time it. So, there are 64 movements in the form of Tai Chi I was doing, and you can do it in 10 minutes, but you can do it in 20 minutes. So you have to plan it. So you have to think about space and time and how your body moves in space. And so it's very fascinating. So I find to be extremely related to bass playing, actually. Yeah. And for me, it helped me so much in my teaching. Now I can see in like in a split second if there's any tension anywhere in their body. And it's really helpful. Personally, I have never been injured, which is pretty amazing. Because, I really credit my dad because he was there, like, on every day, making sure I didn't get into bad habits. And I'm, very, what would I say, kind of relaxed kind of personality. So I never really, even in a stressful situation, I don't get so tense that way. But, I really was frustrated with my student not be able to help them. And that was just, for me, the way to do that.
It's wonderful. I've had a limited. I did some Tai Chi classes, and I took an Alexander class, and Tai Chi in particular. Yeah, just that. I found it so related to just performing and just body awareness in general. It really helped me just sort of isolate and understand what where things were really coming from, and just motion and time, and so that's great that you've. That had an effect on your teaching like that.
Yeah. Did you know that Tai Chi is actually the deadliest of all martial arts?
That's what I've heard, yeah.
Yeah, it will kill people, like somebody. It's like pretty amazing. You see the old people doing it, but actually it's pretty powerful. And when you do it right, you get so much energy from it. It's amazing. Yeah, and like you said, being more aware of your body, we're moving in space, using your core, which, that's something I teach a lot with my students, is really being more aware of your core, where that's where you have your energy and power, so that, your arms are free and you don't have this tension coming from your shoulders. So that's all, very important. Yeah. And also, you play hopefully for many, many, many years, so you have to really make sure your body's in top shape and they have a lot of awareness.
Yeah. Well, this is super fun. By the way, thank you for chatting. You've been recommended many, many times for the podcast. I actually have a spreadsheet, and whenever someone sends in a recommendation, I just I put that down just so I have a record. And you're on there many times. And actually, a student, I forget who it was, but a student of yours just emailed me out of the blue, I think last week, and just was giving me recommendations. And I said, "Oh yeah, well, I'm actually chatting with her for the podcast next week." So,
That's cool.
I love chatting with people again. So if something if we're at the same event at some point in the future or over the phone like this, the door is always open. And I usually end with some sort of question for young people, advice for young people. And what I usually ask, and feel free to answer this however you want, but usually if we go back to, how old were you when you came to Curtis? Were you around 20?
I just turned 20 when I came to Curtis, yes.
Okay. So if you could go back in time and talk to yourself, your 20-year-old self, and give her some advice, if there's anything you might say, and it's a super wide question, but what might you tell your 20-year-old self, knowing what you know now?
Oh, God.
I know, I'm sorry.
Another thing. Well, one thing I would say is I was very stubborn, so I would say, just be more open-minded, be more flexible, listen to what people have to say more. I was so stubborn then. And definitely, being more flexible and, just you never know who you're going to meet, who's going to help you. And I didn't really have a plan of what I wanted to do with my career. I knew I liked very much solo playing and chamber music. And that's what I did quite a bit for a long time. And although I've played also orchestra, but that was the big thing for me. But I didn't really plan too much because I didn't want to put pressure on myself. And I think that's very important to keep that flexibility and that open mind, so that you just never know what can happen. You have to keep that passion going. It's very important to be curious, and be inquisitive and just really follow through that passion. One thing I would say also is that I felt like I wish I had a mentor. And I think as young, musicians who starting in their career, having that person doesn't have to be somebody who plays your instrument, but somebody who knows about the business and try to, to help you and support you. I think I wish I had that more. That would have helped tremendously, because I knew so little when I graduated in this part of, I knew a lot, of course, about playing the bass, but the business, I knew very, very little. At the time, things have changed a lot now, but at the time, you're not even taught how to write a resume or write a letter for a presenter or anything. So having that person, that mentor, I think would have been really great thing, great support for me. Yeah. So that's basically, and keeping that passion.
That's important.
Because sometimes, really, honestly, you can really lose. It's easy to, after a while, there's so many ups and downs. It's easy to get tired, and burn out. So, just try to know your purpose in the musical life.
Pascale, thank you so much for chatting. What a pleasure to connect with you. Folks, check out the show notes. We got links to her various school profiles and all that kind of good stuff. And thank you for listening to the podcast. I have such a good time chatting with people like Pascale, who've done so much in the bass world. And I really hope you get a lot out of these conversations. I totally do. I'm sitting here at my desk in my San Francisco place. I'm looking at my Schleswig-Holstein posters. I'm chatting with her. We're reminiscing about Leonard Bernstein and working on The Rite of Spring with him. And by the way, that's a phenomenal video. You have to check that out. You can find some clips on YouTube. And yeah, thanks for joining us. I have so much fun each and every week talking with these people. And if you have a suggestion for a guest like Pascale, who's been suggested so many times for the podcast, reach out and let me know. feedback@contrabassconversations.com. And if you aren't subscribed to the podcast yet, there's so many ways you can do it. I wish it was easier. It's still a little bit of a learning curve, but we try to make it as easy as possible. All the options to get these delivered directly to you are at contrabassconversations.com/subscribe. And while you're there, go ahead and follow us on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or YouTube or wherever you like to hang out. We're there, and we're bringing you these conversations each and every week. And we've got a great production team. Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring help put these episodes together and get them out into the world. And if you're looking for a double bass, Mitch Mooring is making great basses down in the Dallas area in Texas. Check him out at mitchmooring.com. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.